faith is real and it's lived out and it makes a difference. And it's for justice and it's for equality and it's for peace and it's for transformation.
Hey guys, my name's Philippe.
And I'm Nate.
Welcome to the All Nations podcast.
We seek to inspire, equip and mobilize toward global mission.
Tune in as we share insights, stories and practical steps on how you can make an impact around the world.
We hope you enjoyed this.
Hello everybody, welcome to All Nations podcast.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop, whoop. And today actually for the first time I'm going to be co-hosting with the one and only Nate.
Can't believe it's the first time, man. 5 episodes in or whatever it is.
We try and inspire people here, right, Nate?
That's true. We at All Nations podcast seek to inspire, equip and mobilize.
And there's nothing more inspirational than these pair of socks, baby.
Yeah, mate, look at these socks. Get
Beautiful socks. Just kidding. But I love your socks though.
Thank you. Today we're joined with
the one,
the only.
She is an anthropologist.
She is currently wearing orange.
And she is a mum.
And she is a doctor.
And she is a woman.
That's true, and a blonde woman as well.
A blonde woman. She is
Dr. Hannah Green.
Dr. Hannah Green. Woo! Hannah,
welcome.
Very excited to have you here. It is not the morning.
It is not the morning. It is
not,
afternoon.
Exactly,
it's a good start.
Exactly. Because probably if it was the morning, we wouldn't be so excited like this, Hannah.
It's the post
Only after
madness.
a cup of coffee.
Yeah, a couple of coffee breaks.
Hannah, it is great to have you with us. We're really excited about this. Me and Nate have been thinking about it as well, and you know, everything that you already teach here, everything that we've learned from you already here at All Nations, and we would love to hear a bit more from you and hear your story as well, you know, and how you got into what you do and all that.
Yeah.
Great. It's really good to be here, and it's good to have a chance to share that, because I don't think much of that has been shared, particularly in my classes. So it'll be good to speak with you guys on a different side, a different angle.
There you go, a side of Hannah Green which you students haven't seen in class.
This is the real stuff, only here at All Nations Christian College podcast.
Only here.
So Hannah, you're an anthropologist.
I am.
I was wondering if you've ever experienced a time where two cultures have sort of come together, collided in a way that has been particularly funny.
I don't know about funny, but one of my favourite culture clashes to observe at the beginning of each term is, you may know we have lots of Dutch students here. We also have lots of British students as our sort of two biggest group. And British use "hello, how are you" as a greeting. And I love observing it in the first week where the Dutch will get very offended when the Brits ask "hello, how are you" and then walk off, and they're like, do you care how I am? And every year I see that happen. And in the first couple of weeks I do make sure to teach the British students, but I let it happen first. And so that's something I quite enjoy watching play out.
That is epic. You're representing the Dutch well today with your orange.
I am,
t-shirt.
a little shout to I feel like I'm becoming more Dutch the more I stay here. Becoming slightly more direct in my approach, which I think is a good thing.
Hannah, we would love to hear, as you said in the beginning, about, you know, part of your story that probably no one knows about here in college and all that, and the side of you that we're not able to sometimes to see because you're a tutor here and all that, and we're in class and you're always acting like the professor.
Absolutely.
But we would love to hear, you know, your background story, how you grew up. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. So what's interesting, I think, is that my story is probably quite different to many stories.
That's what we love here.
I did grow up in a Christian home. I probably gave my life to Christ at sort of age 6 or 7 at a spring harvest festival. But the term mission was never really part of my story growing up. Okay. I don't think I even really heard the word mission. I remember when I was a bit older, my mum's friend coming to stay who was a missionary in that sort of very traditional sense. And all I remember about him was that he had some toes missing. Okay. And we were incredibly intrigued about these missing toes. So we thought that mission was something really exotic and dangerous and led you to be missing toes.
That's funny.
But what was interesting looking back now through a missional lens was that my church that I went to as a child growing up, it's quite a crazy church. We met in a barn, complete with livestock at Christmas.
Wow.
The real deal.
So it was the
Real
real
deal.
deal.
It was the real
Exactly.
deal. We lived out what I would now know to be integral mission.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So as part of our church, just being part of the church, one Saturday every month we had something called a working day. And everyone in the church would turn up and we'd just go to people in the village that needed it, paint somebody's wall or pull down their shed or do some gardening or, so that was part of our rhythm of life. And then once a week, 1 week every summer, we'd have what we called a working week and we'd all camp in the fields where this barn was. And we'd go out and do jobs every day. So we'd do things like playground painting. So most of the playgrounds in Norfolk where I grew up were actually painted, that you put the hopscotch on and things like that. Yeah. Most of them were painted by our church, or people from our church. Wow. And, kids were fully involved in that. So right from being young, complete with spilt paint and magically got tidied up into a snake head or something, we were always living that out, but never with that term mission. So it's interesting looking back now to think, but obviously, as you say, I'm an anthropologist and I still struggle with that term, mission.
Yeah.
So I work in a mission college, so I probably shouldn't admit this. But this idea of missionary and mission as it's traditionally understood, I'm very aware of the background and some of the harm of that. So I still... I find it weird to be on this podcast talking about my life as a missionary, given that I would not define myself
as a missionary
in that way.
Yeah.
So the terminology for me is an interesting thing, but the living out, if we go back to what Mark said about mission is joining in with what God is doing, then that's something I can get on board with. And that's something that I have seen played out through my life, through my church, through my work.
Wow, it's incredible.
That's incredible.
And tell us a little bit more about your work and your studies as an anthropologist and how that's helped you understand some of these concepts that are more traditionally associated with, I guess, mission and missionary work.
So it might be worth probably taking a step back and talking about my journey of how I got to being here as a missionary anthropologist, which I'm still not sure exists as a real thing in the UK.
The one and only.
So the thing I have been good at, we have something like we're good at in life, but the thing that I was good at was I was quite good at studying.
Oh wow.
And that's quite boring.
Big flex.
When you're like a teenager and it's just like you're the most uncool person because you're not good at sport. You're just clever. And I rebelled against that a lot. But that was what I was good at. And I had a really inspiring geography teacher when I was at high school. And she was, it was at the time when Nestle were doing lots of going into countries and trying to promote formula milk and lots of harm was being done through that. So if we walked into her classroom for Nestle product, it was confiscated. Okay. That was it. She was a really passionate person. And I was really inspired at that point to be interested in global issues, particularly in inequality. So in the majority world, in inequality. And that led me to go on and do a degree actually in geography, not in anthropology. I didn't know anthropology existed, or I think I probably would have done an anthropology degree. But rural Norfolk doesn't do anthropology.
Okay.
So I went and did a geography degree. And towards the end of that degree, I started feeling frustrated that, yes, this academic stuff's all good, it's interesting, I'm good at it, came out with a first, but what do I do with it? I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
So at that point, I sort of left academia and did some various jobs and didn't really know what to do with myself, but still had this international flavour.
Yeah.
So I decided to go off and I went to Madagascar for 3 months.
Wow.
And spent some time there. And I sort of thought, this is either going to get it out of my system or it's going to
Be a nice
confirm that be a nice holiday. No, confirm that this is something I'm passionate about, something I want to do.
Yeah.
Like, actually, I distinctly remember doing a course towards the end of my degree, and I think it was like a leadership course or something. And one of the things I did is like, picture yourself in 20 years' time, and everyone was like, you know, I've got my family and I've got my house, and I was like, I'm in Africa, no husband, no kids, not interested in that. You know, I'm living in Africa with no shoes and doing something, completely no idea what that was. So I then went and worked for a bit. I went to Madagascar. And actually at that time, I kind of rejected Christian organisations. So again, this sort of anti-missional, so God has a sense of humour, doesn't he? This sort of anti-missional thing in me that's like, I am going with a secular institution, I'm going my own way. And I loved it. I loved Madagascar. It was amazing, but it was quite harmful to me. Sort of spiritually, mentally, there were some quite harmful things that happened there.
Yeah.
That one, I wasn't protected from, but two, I didn't have the spiritual protection either. And Madagascar is a very spiritual place.
Yeah.
So that was.
So you saying you were not equipped? You feel you weren't equipped spiritually? Is that what you?
I think I was trying to run away from God actually in doing that. I think I was rejecting His part in my overseas life.
Right.
Okay. You know, it was like, I am going to go, and I'm going to go with a secular organisation because I want to do the development, and I reject the mission side of things.
Do your own mission, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't see it as intentionally going there to do work for God. I saw it as it's all about the physical needs of people. And now I can see you can have both of those.
Yeah.
But it felt to me then that you either had to go and be an evangelist, which wasn't me, or you went and did development. And that I didn't have that concept again of holistic
bringing it together,
mission. Yeah, so that was a difficult time, but it did confirm in me that, you know, my heart was for Africa. My heart was there, and that was something I wanted to continue. But then I met Phil, and when we sort of got together, we were both in transition points. And so we decided to do a master's, because, you know, that's what you do when you're in transition. You go and do a really hard piece of education. So we went to the University of East Anglia, and we both were entered into the School of International Development, but did different awards within that. I told him after that he is never ever studying again, because he was a nightmare. But for me, I got towards the end of my masters, and I didn't audibly hear God, but I got a strong sense that he was saying, you should apply for your PhD.
Wow.
So I was like, sure, let's apply for a PhD. So I sent off these sort of funding applications and finished off my masters, and then I got this letter saying you have a fully funded scholarship to do your PhD.
Wow.
And I was like, oh.
Exceptional.
And now you understand where that comes from, mate.
Yeah.
that beginning story.
Exactly.
Yes.
A girl who didn't want to do sports, do nothing apart from studying.
Yep. And this
all makes sense now.
Yes. And I have found my sport, by the way, as well now. So it's
Okay.
okay.
It's
It's not.
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
Definitely not volleyball. But I was then like, oh my word, no, I have to do this. You know, this is what happens when you're faithful to God, isn't it? It's just like, didn't think through the consequences of that. Now I have to do a PhD. So I got this funding to do this PhD research in Uganda. We Phil obviously was sort of going to be dragged along with me. First year of my PhD, I planned a PhD and got married, so that was quite a big year.
Jeez.
It was quite fun. And then, you know, Richard said, you could tell I've been listening to them.
Well
he said, one of the things you'll get used to in mission is plans have changed. So we were due to go to Uganda on the Monday. We'd been married 3 months, so we'd lived in this, basically an old people's bungalow for 3 months, because where can you rent for 3 months?
Wow.
We'd moved out on the Friday, we put all our stuff in storage. We had a wedding on the Saturday, and we were flying to Uganda on the Monday.
Wow.
So, and on the way to the wedding, I had a hospital appointment. And the hospital had said, we know what's wrong with you. We just need to do something and sort it out, and then you can, off you go. got to the hospital. I was under general anaesthetic, which sent me a bit doolally. So they thought something more serious was wrong with me. So at the time they thought I had leukemia.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So on the Saturday, before we were due to go on the Monday, I sent Phil a message saying, we're not going to Uganda, ha ha. Because I was fully drugged up on
Delusional.
anaesthetic. I have not had an anaesthetic since. So we had to, on the way to the wedding, cancel our flights. Luckily, we'd put good travel insurance in place.
Wow.
Always important.
I had to move in with his parents for 5 months.
Oh, wow.
Turns out I didn't have leukemia, but there was something else wrong with me and they needed to get my medication sorted, work out what that would look like while I was living a year in Uganda. So we had this sort of waiting time, really. And, it isn't one of these times where you can tell a testimony of, God worked it all out for good. If I'd have gone 5 months earlier, this would have happened. It was like, I don't know why we were waiting.
Can I just ask you a question on that? So basically, when you shared about Madagascar, and you said that it wasn't a very good spiritually sort of time for you, not ready for it.
Yeah.
How did you feel this time then, when you felt God call you to go to Uganda, then to do your PhD? How was it? And then, of course, now you've waited 5 months before actually going.
Yep.
How was it? How did you feel when God called you again? Sort of to step out into that.
That's really interesting because terminology, I would never use that word cool.
Mm-hmm.
So in mission, we always put this real emphasis on what's your calling.
Yeah.
And I think for some people that's amazing. You hear people like Richard Evans talk and they've got such a clear calling on their lives.
Yeah.
For me, I'm not sure God ever put one clear calling on my life. It was like going to Uganda was a step in my PhD.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do feel, partly I was married. I went to Madagascar as a single woman.
Yeah.
And that to an organisation that didn't protect that fact.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention who that was.
Yeah.
I went as a married woman in a much different place. I was not running away from God. I was being faithful to God. It was almost like Madagascar was my Jonah in the whale.
Yeah.
And then Uganda was... Actually, I've gone to Nineveh.
Yeah.
Even though I do not want to put Uganda in those terms at all. It's
sure,
an incredible place. It's not somewhere that is evil that I didn't want to go, but it's just like, in terms of my faithfulness, Uganda was me going faithfully as part of my... And I actually wanted to go to Nigeria, so even the fact I went to Uganda was just like, this is... My university wouldn't let me go to Nigeria. At the time, it wasn't safe for me to go there. So, it just felt like a step. It never felt like, I'd never have said, oh, it's my calling to go to Uganda, but it felt like the next step.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
And why Uganda specifically? I mean, you had sort of already exposure to an African context in Madagascar. Was there a specific reason for Uganda?
Do you know what? It's really boring and academic, but I actually followed an anthropologist who had worked there 25 years before to the same trading centre, the same area. So, it's kind of mad when I think about it now. We flew to Uganda, we got off at the airport to meet Noah.
Noah.
Yeah. And we arrived at an airport with no photo, no idea who Noah was. But this anthropologist who had been there 25 years before was like, oh, I'll put you in touch with Noah.
No last name.
So we
Noah.
turned up at the airport and we met Noah, who thankfully did turn up to meet us. And we drove across the country. And then we'd said, we'd looked at where we were going on the map and had said, well, it's quite near to Mbali. It's near a town. Phil, you'll be able to find something to do in Mbali. And as we drove along this road, they said, oh, this is the road to Basolwe where we were going. Yeah. And Phil thought, oh, yeah, that's not too bad. We drove for an hour from the tarmac road before we were at Basolwe.
Wow.
So actually it was an hour from the closest tarmac road.
Wow.
So it was proper rural Uganda. And, even when you go to the capital, some people don't know that area of the country.
Wow.
But it was incredible. It was just... that they let me just live there for a year with my notebook and ask a million questions. And be entered into a million homes and given cups of tea and ground nuts to eat, and just to spend time sitting on the rugs with the women and the babies, and
Wow.
to go to the local church, and none of this mega church, just go to the local church and meet under the mango tree, and all of those sort of slightly stereotypical ideas. But actually it was such a privilege to just live life alongside my Ugandan friends, and we got adopted into families, so our Ugandan families.
Do you also get names like Ugandan names?
Yes.
Oh.
Do you remember your Ugandan
Yes.
names still?
So the trouble is, I would take Phil's name.
Okay.
So we would be the Wamadanyas.
The one with Daniel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and Hannah isn't a name in Uganda, so I'm Kana there as well. Yes.
Kind of one with Daniel.
Kana Wamadanya.
Got a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Maybe we could change it, give a slightly more international flavour.
Redo the intro.
We should have done that.
So yeah, I mean, that was just a real privileged time, and it was a really healing time.
Well.
As well, like I think God did some healing there from all the stuff that happened in Madagascar.
Yeah.
And just to be there with Phil and share our, it's quite a crazy first year of married life. For the first 3 months, we lived in a little guest house, basically. So we had a room with, ensuite is a very grand name for what we had. But literally, if you argued, the only place to go was the toilet. And you would go in there and I'd sit in the shower because I'd be grumpy. Because you couldn't, you can't sort out your arguments by having a shout and then going off, and, all eyes are on you at all times.
Yeah.
So I remember sulking in the shower a few times.
Wow.
But it was a crazy, and we it's that kind of thing. If we can survive this as our first year of marriage, 5 months with your parents and a year in Uganda, we can get through
survive
most
anything.
things.
Anything.
Yeah,
Wow.
yep. Although I'd say the greater tests came later, but so did that, and then I got back and sat on the floor for a week and went.
But how long did you stay there though?
So a year.
1
We
year.
did a
1 year.
year in Uganda. Yeah, and it was, as I say, incredible. And actually, this is another slightly God sense of humour, that when we went, we vowed we are not setting up a charity. Christians go out to Uganda and they set up charities, and it's just really annoying, and it's really white saviour complex, But we got to this area where we were, and I had to, I have to eat my words here, because there was just, you went to the next district and it's World Vision and all the signs, and you get into ours and there was just nothing. And it's an area that's known for witchcraft, and people have said, they're too hard to work with. We can't work with these people.
Wow.
And then we met all these wonderful and inspiring people that were just like, I want to do my equivalent of A-level exams, but I have to buy the ream of paper to sit my exam, and I can't afford the ream of paper. And it's such a ridiculous hurdle. It's like the thing that is stopping me from sitting my exam is I have to pay for my own paper to sit the exam.
Wow.
And we just saw there was these things that were just like that were hurdles, and they're just like little paper clips that it's just like becomes a chain that you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So one of the things Phil did do while we were there is he worked to establish a charity that we founded in 2011, and we're still trustees members of. It's now 2 charities. So one based in Uganda, which is entirely Ugandan run, and then we've got the fundraising charity in the UK, and obviously we communicate a lot. So we're still heavily involved in that. But yeah, we stayed there for a year, and I got back, and then I was like, I've left Uganda. I'm back on English soil, and now I've got to write up a thesis. So, that was, we talk about, one of the things I talk about in class actually is reverse culture shocks. I talk about culture shock when you go somewhere, but reverse culture shock. And I remember distinctly getting home from Uganda and going to the supermarket, which is always a bad thing to do anyway. When you've been somewhere else and you come back and you go to a supermarket. And I remember going to the sugar aisle. It was particularly the sugar aisle. And there were like 10 different sorts of sugar. And I was just like, I can't do this. I just left.
Wow.
I just could not, you know, I was like, I'm either going to sit down and cry in the sugar aisle,
Mm.
or I think I better walk out right now. So, you know.
What was, if you could give us the 1, 2, 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know
Yeah.
how many you would have, but lessons that you think you've learned in your time in Uganda?
Mm.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I would say probably the biggest is patience and grace.
Mm.
So you asked, the first question to start with, Nate, you asked about, you know, culture clashes.
Yeah.
And obviously we see those
Mm.
all the time, and it's
Right.
wearing and it's tiring. Whether that's we've gone somewhere different, or whether it's just we're constantly interacting with people from different cultures and they don't see things the way we do.
Mm.
And a lot of it requires you to stand back to say, what is going on here?
Mm.
To take the patience to go, okay, why is this frustrating me? Or why is what I'm saying not being communicated effectively?
Mm.
Or what are they understanding and what am I not understanding?
Right.
But then when you combine that with grace, that is a game changer.
Right.
Mm.
Because actually it's not just I've taken the time, I understand it, you're wrong.
Mm.
It's I've taken the time, I understand it, and your perspective could just as well be right as mine.
Right.
You know, and then we're asking God to work in that. You know, not my will.
Mm.
Not my will, but yours. Okay, well, what do we do? How can I give up myself to serve others?
Yeah.
Wow.
And for me, I think that is how I've understood mission, is when we intentionally decide that whatever we are doing
Mm.
is for God's purposes.
Mm.
Wow.
And actually, His grace will help us to do that.
Yeah.
So it's our own grace with others, but
Mm.
also leaning
Yeah.
on God's grace in order to have that patience and that
Wow.
grace. And I would say that's my biggest cross-cultural lesson that I have learned through my time in Uganda. There are many, many, many other lessons.
I can imagine, yeah.
The other one, actually, which I think is really, really important, is never underestimate what you can learn from others.
Mm. That's
Wow.
a very good one, actually.
So, I have a lovely story I tell in my class where a friend of mine, well, a friend of a friend, you know, one of these stories that becomes almost your own, she was doing a Bible study with some Chinese women.
Yeah.
And she was sharing the story of Mary and Martha.
Mm.
And, you know, she was the one leading the Bible study. She was the one who knew the Bible. She was sharing with these sort of new, exploring Christian women.
Yeah.
And they said, well, Mary was an awful older sister.
Wow.
And she was just like, what do you mean, older sister? It doesn't say anything in the Bible
Mm.
about, Martha. Mary was an awful younger sister.
Yeah.
Mm.
Doesn't say anything in the Bible about Mary being younger, who was older. And they were like, no, Martha opened the door. Martha was cooking.
Oh, wow. So they were seen for different lenses.
Mary is the younger sister.
Wow.
And she was just like, I just learned a new, it doesn't necessarily reveal anything massive, but it's
No,
just
no.
like, I've just learned something new.
Yeah.
There are different ways of interpreting
Yeah.
what you see. I just see it as their two sisters. They have a clear, there's an age hierarchy there.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think the other thing is you can learn so much if you take the time to observe,
Mm.
to listen, and not just plough in. And obviously as an anthropologist, that is my trade. You know, that is what I do. I observe, I listen. But we can all get more skilled in that.
Mm.
Wow.
And it's something we can all do.
I mean, that's two great
Mm.
points there about grace being the key to crossing cultural barriers and the importance of being open to learn from people who are different to you. I have a question about, just going back to what you were saying about re-entry. I was hoping maybe you could speak into that and reverse culture shock. Like, how would you remedy reverse culture shock as best as possible?
That's that's another really good question. I think it's not even so much what you can do, but what others around you can do as well. So actually, well, it's partly both. So probably my reverse culture shock was worse in Madagascar, even though I'd only been there a short time.
Wow.
And partly that was because I went on my own, and partly because I didn't communicate with anyone.
Okay.
I fully, threw myself in and decided, I'm here. This is my entire life. I bet, I maybe went to the internet cafe once or twice to tell my mum I was alive. I did at one point tell her I had malaria and didn't tell her I was okay.
Oh, wow.
So she had to wait about a month
that
to
went
find
down
out if I was okay or not. Sorry, Mum. So I think one of the things is making sure you communicate well, even when you're gone, with those who are back home. And actually that is an onus on us. How do we communicate to people what we're doing? How do we join them in with our story? So I think that is really important while we're away. We found when we were in Uganda, we had a blog, and people who had engaged with our blog, it was much easier to relate to them. Because it's not just like, what have you been doing for the last year?
Yeah.
It's like they can pick up on specific things and ask you about it. But what's been the best part of the year? You're like, I can't answer that. I have no idea. Also, my memory is about as good as a goldfish. So I can't really remember, what was my best part? I don't know. What happened yesterday?
Says the one with the PhD.
I know.
Yeah, exactly, mate.
Academically clever. Real life skills. Somewhat lacking. So communicating with others, and then others intentionally making the effort to keep up with you, I think is really important. So encouraging your friends and family, this is what you can do to support me.
Okay.
So that when I come home, I'm going to feel still connected to you. Because you'll know this as a Mish kid, you start to feel like you don't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, what does that, you're not a Mish kid, but as an international, TCK. So, they need to help you with that belonging.
Yeah.
Avoid supermarkets.
Yeah. Yeah. My parents took me to like the biggest mall on my first couple of hours being back in South Africa, and I think I just freaked out.
Mate.
Completely. And on the ship I was also I had basically no money. We'd get 20 euros a month, and I left my credit card in South Africa 2 days before I went to the ship, So I just lived off of 20 euros a month, and then all of a sudden my parents are trying to spoil me being back, and I'm like,
too much, too overwhelming.
Any other day probably would have been great. But
So possibly recognising what your trigger points are going to be. And that works both ways. So with culture shock and reverse culture shock, I never cried more than on transport in Uganda. Public transport was my nemesis. I hated it. However, I do say if you want to sort out your prayer life, go to Uganda and get on one of the little motorcycles.
Nice.
And you'll soon be good at praying. So, it works both ways. But yeah, maybe avoiding your triggers and encouraging the people around you that this is what you can do to help me.
Right.
Stay in touch with others.
Hearing you say that, and I keep thinking, sometimes we're so worried about the first time we're leaving, let's say that first cultural shock.
Yeah.
But then you go there, everyone who stayed behind, they're not living what you're living, right?
Yeah.
So you're being transformed sort of, into learning this new culture, embracing this new culture, different ways of eating, different ways of waking up. It's a totally different way of life. And that depends on which culture you go to. But then when you come back pretty much a new person, because you've been, going through so many different experiences. But the people who are here, they were just here living their lives, and they expect you to be the same as them.
Yep. Yeah. But then we can also miss the development and change in people who are here. But we've developed and changed in very different ways.
Right.
But you're expected when you're home to fit in. When you are away, you're not expected to know everything. So there is that difference of expectation that goes with it.
Yeah. In
terms of, you should know how to live in your own country. You should know how to navigate a supermarket, or whatever it is. And that can be very, very challenging.
Wow. So what did you do after you completed your thesis? How long did that take you as well?
So I did my thesis in just over 3 years, which was pretty good given that I did have the 5-month delay in the middle.
Okay.
And I actually really, maybe I'm quite weird, I quite enjoyed doing my PhD. I just wrote a really big story.
Okay.
Although in the words of my son when he discovered my book, as he calls it 2 years ago, it's impressive but boring. Thanks, Isaac.
Well, I'm sure you didn't have any pictures. Did you have any pictures in it?
Not
No,
many.
next time, you know.
I'm not gonna read your book. You've got to have pictures in it.
Me neither, to be fair.
So, you know, I finished that in just over 3 years. And then I had another sort of just not hearing from God, a bit of a wilderness phase. So I did jobs. The jobs were fine, you know, and actually looking back now, again, I can see, I think of my life as a little bit like a jigsaw. So some people have the picture that they're working from.
Yeah.
You know, that they kind of know what their jigsaw is going to look like. You know, God's sort of given them a calling, given them a plan. I don't have the picture. So I'm just sort of finding random pieces and putting them in.
Yeah.
And so I worked in jobs, and now I look back and I think what I did there was I got very good at communicating complex things. So I worked as a researcher for charities where I was communicating complex research ideas in a way that could be communicated to the public that would have a social impact.
The sort of thing that only smart people can do.
Is this going to be my headline?
Yeah.
And rather it wasn't. As I say, I rejected it for a long time, Philippe. So I did that, and then it's one of these God things. So my husband Phil, he came to a conference here at All Nations. I didn't even know All Nations exists. I live half an hour away.
Wow.
There you go.
You know,
that's why the podcast.
This is why this is what you're doing. You are
Person
making it
and
known to people half an hour away.
Yeah,
And so Phil came here actually for a conference for his work. And he happened to be sitting on a table with Andy Dipper, who was the principal at the time.
Yep.
And for some reason, he was talking about what I do. And Andy was like, oh, we need one of those. So I wasn't even really looking for a new job. But I went for an informal conversation, which became an interview.
Oh, wow.
I never actually got the informal conversation. I just got an interview. Yeah.
Wow.
Which was intense. It's a whole day affair.
So you were prepared for an informal conversation?
No, I did know it was an interview before I came, but
okay.
the sort of, you know,
Straight in.
it wasn't quite as mad as it sounds. To be honest, I don't think I got the job on any merit. I think I was the only candidate.
The one and the only.
The one and the
Spin the
only,
theme.
Josh.
Exactly.
But they took a chance on me, and actually I probably didn't look that qualified, but it felt like a piece in the puzzle where suddenly I'd put a piece in and a big chunk came to life. I could see that this is what I was meant to do. It turns out I think I'm quite good at teaching, you know, and I'm not someone who says that easily, but I feel like actually this is a skill God had given me.
Yeah.
And it was mad. Anybody who's ever taught will know that the first year...
I was here.
That's crazy.
I think I
You were there
died.
for her first year?
Yep.
I basically
doing children.
didn't sleep for a year.
I could see it.
You can see me gradually descend into madness. I also had an 18-month-old
doing
baby
great.
at that point.
Oh, wow, that helps.
So, you know, and a toddler. So I had 2 small children and first year of lecturing.
But you did great.
Jeez.
It was mad, but I felt strongly God had put this in place, which is a real confirmation. And I've had a couple of points where God has done mad things like that through my life, where he confirms things that are going to be difficult for me. So I ended up here, and I think in 2 weeks' time I'll have been here 6 years.
Wow.
Wow, 6 years.
Yeah. So I'm marginally less manic than I was that first year.
Yeah.
I'm
Still
not sure we're
standing
going
on
much.
one leg
Yeah.
while teaching.
I'm not sure we can say I'm
Still
fully.
sitting. Are you still sitting on the table?
Yeah, she
well,
does.
no, because the Zoom makes it more difficult now.
Okay.
So
But
I
every
just
now-
don't want
every
every
now
now
and
and then,
then,
I still
yeah.
get to sit on the table. Your class was the one with you had Alison in it, didn't you?
Yes. Alison.
Yeah, Banya came along once, and he was their adopted child, and he told me off for sitting on the table, but in sign language because he was there, and I was like, sorry, Banya, had to get off the table and behave. But yes, so I've now been here 6 years, and my feet age.
Oh. Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, I've never been in one place this long.
Yeah.
So this is exciting. It's wonderful. It's definitely, it's been an amazing journey, and it's kept me stimulated. I love the students. I love the fact that I can use my academic boring talent to inspire and equip you guys that go off to do all these incredible things. So, my itchy feet get lived vicariously through you guys.
There you go.
And that's, that's where
But you know what I find extraordinary, that you from your whole background when you was a kid, meeting in the barn with the horses and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then moving on without really even wanting to, the Lord gets you out of here. You didn't even know that what was ahead of you. And you go have that bad experience in Madagascar. You still come back. You still go out again to Uganda to do your PhD. So let's say really focused in what you as a person, let's say, I believe God called you to be a teacher.
Yeah.
He was the one who made you so smart. I dropped out of school at 15 years old. See how
You've done
smart
all right
since. But what I'm saying is, the journey that you have been through, you can see God preparing you the whole way through.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really can. And this is what my testimony is, I think, is that you don't have to be able to see the whole picture because God can. And actually, all you've got to do is be faithful in putting those pieces, putting those pieces in. And then there'll be times when you get a glimpse of what that picture looks like, and it's incredible. And I'm still, it's still only a very partial glimpse of what God's picture looks like for me and that wider story. But it's incredible to get those insights, like those points where you can look back and go, oh wow. And I do believe God's brought me here, and I do believe this journey, I absolutely believe that this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Wow.
And having that assurance is really encouraging at times when you are basically not sleeping for a year.
Yeah. Wow.
And with all the juggle of everything else, so I am thankful within that this place is just so special to me in that it was a place where I got a glimpse of that picture of what it looked like.
That's exceptional. And how have you sort of now, as an anthropology lecturer with a more missional focus, what would you say you sort of learned in terms of the links between anthropology and mission, and what is perhaps the most useful parts of that and how that relates to mission?
It's really been exciting for me to, I don't know if I should confess this, I've never actually studied anthropology.
Yeah, okay.
So I have always done anthropology from a practical, applied standpoint. So I did it within international development.
Yeah.
So that shift from looking to international development to mission, in some ways it's not big at all.
Yeah.
It's still an applied, you're still thinking about, going out and living cross-culturally, and the concepts are still really relevant. But you have that difference that God makes within there.
Yeah.
Which is a huge.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference. And so it's been a real journey for me of, I basically came here without the mission terminology. This is why they took such a big chance on me. I came here as a secular anthropologist, suddenly thrown into a mission college.
Yeah.
And I remember saying when I got the job, I'm not Christian enough for this. Somebody saying to me, well, that's why they need you. But I was definitely I am not Christian enough to work here.
Maybe that's why you need them.
Maybe that's why I need them. And so it's been a real learning journey for me in both increased recognition of the harms that have been done through mission, particularly through colonialism. And I think we all should be aware of that. We can't ignore history. But also with the amazing things that mission is doing.
Right.
And the amazing, we get students come in that are just doing incredible things with cultures, that they are fully respecting, fully honouring the cultures where they live, where they are just bringing Jesus into them. And so the big thing for me has been to learn from the students as much as I teach.
Right.
You know, I can bring a concept, and I can look up that concept in the Bible, and I can see how Jesus lived that out. But then I hear the students come in and how they are living it out. And that for me is where the richness, it's in you guys, it's in the students, is where the richness really comes in. That, as I say, you know, I'm introducing this concept. Now, what does that look like where you are? And you get all these different answers and all these people doing these different things. And sometimes you get people looking back and going, oh, I made those mistakes. But actually, again, we're recognising our mistakes and we're going, okay,
and we're learning from them.
And we're learning from them, and God can use those. So for me, that's been a really, it's again, I'm using this word healed quite a lot, but it's mended, it's healed my very tenuous relationship with mission based on its very traditional definition.
Sure.
To there's a much wider idea.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
this whole idea of holistic mission.
Yeah.
It's what I knew, but it's I now
knew
have
it
all the terminology.
Yeah.
I now have the terminology to apply it, and that for me has been really, really significant in going. Faith is real and it's lived out, and it makes a difference, and it's for justice. And it's for equality,
For peace.
and it's for peace, and it's for transformation, and, you know, and all of these. It's for holism, you know. We want to see people restored. It's not. We want to go and proclaim a message of brim and hellfire.
Yeah.
You know, to places. You know, it's not poison with Bible. It's something so much more, and I see that lived in the lives of the people I teach.
Sure. Wow. Hannah, it's been extraordinary to hear your story. Now, one question I have: now that you have sort of been, that you're sort of becoming, because I always think about it, is that we never ever get to a certain point where we've arrived and that's it. We're always striving towards a new goal or something that's changing us a bit more and all that. So now that you have been becoming this anthropologist with this vision and mission perspective, how then can you share something that could inspire our listeners today, from your own story and, you know, what God has been teaching you and the way God has been genuine? If you like, we've been hearing your whole story here, which is great.
So, am I allowed to do two?
Yeah.
You can do as many as you want.
Okay, so my first one would very much be to truly expand our idea of mission.
Okay.
You know, even if we know the theory, we know mission is more than you go overseas with a mission organisation. That's still kind of what we, in our bones, feel like you're only a true missionary if you're going in that sort of style.
And even going out of your country,
yes,
right?
Yes, absolutely. So, to go back to Mark's idea that's joining in with what God is doing, well, then mission is anything where we intentionally say, God, I'm going out to do this for you. So, you know, the contrast of me wanting to live in Africa with no husband and kids, and I've been in a college for 6 years with a husband and kids, you know, it's not lost on me, the irony, but that is still mission. What I am doing is I am training and equipping those who are going out.
Right.
But my mission at the moment is to be here.
Yeah.
And it's to be the trainer. And so to redefine, to broaden and truly believe the broader idea of mission would be my first sort of thing. That it's not just a simple definition. And the second would be to educate ourselves. And by that, it doesn't necessarily mean do formal education. There is a place for that.
Are you trying to promote us here?
Well, I've just, come to all nations. No, but whether it's read a book, whether it's, even if you're going on holiday, you can read up and you can learn a few lines of language. Talk to somebody from a different culture. My kids' school has people from all different cultures. I deliberately on the playground will try and talk to different people. Learn. We've got no excuse anymore to be ignorant
Yeah.
and to make those harmful
Yeah.
mistakes. You know, we will make mistakes,
Yeah.
but there is so much stuff around race, around the experience of LGBTQ plus people. You know, there is stuff that we can educate ourselves on, and we should be. We should be seeking to understand others rather than looking from our own perspective. So expand our definition and educate ourselves in whatever way that looks like.
Wow,
That's great.
that's fantastic. Well, Hannah, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for coming. You've definitely left me feeling inspired, so thank you for that. And
Me too.
for the listeners out there, thank you for listening to this incredible episode, and we'll see you next time on the All Nations Christian College.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.